My name is Mark Treadwell, and this is the 11th video in this series that supports the resource Learning How the Brain Learns, and that can be downloaded free of charge from marktreadwell.com. We've been looking at the development of our understanding of how the brain learns from a neuroscientific, a psychological and a sociological perspective. And from that we've optimized a learning process, and now we're looking at is the competencies that underpin our ability to actually carry out learning effectively and efficiently. And that doesn't matter whether the learner is 2, 5, 10, 20, 50, 90, 100 years old. It doesn't matter. This is a universal learning process that can be applied by anyone to any learning situation. But to do that successfully, we all need a level of competency across a number of different domains. We need it across the concepts and competencies of identity, thinking and questioning, collaboration, having a comprehensive language of learning, managing self, and being able to connect and reflect on existing knowledge, ideas and concepts and reconfigure those into innovative, new, for myself or for maybe in the entire world, new ideas and concept frameworks. John Hattie and Gregory Rates wrote a book recently on learning, and it was very good, and there's some excellent chapters in there. And there's a good quote from there which I really like, and what the two researchers report is that too often students are expected to cope with problems that demand high-level thinking and decision-making, but have not been given the instructional opportunities to develop appropriate tools. Both studies illustrate that strategic thinking, when taught explicitly through group instruction using both modelling and exhortation, in both cases significant gains followed from instruction targeting thinking tools students could apply to complex problems. Now I just want to make the point here that on its own, modelling is minimal, has a minimal effect in comparison to direct instruction. As educators, it's no good us modelling certain things. Some students will pick that up, but usually that's the brighter students, in inverted commas, and that just makes the disparity between those that have success at school and don't even greater still. So we need to be very careful that we teach it explicitly, it's very clear, it's not hidden, and learners are given good opportunity to practice these competencies in day-to-day learning situations. The competencies that we've developed here, the 6 competencies, have been derived from a number of international reports, notably the DeCicco report from the OECD, the Mayer report, and also the Erudice report from the European Union. Each of these reports came out basically saying the same thing. And what they were saying was that if learners are to be lifelong learners, then they need to actually have these competencies. And they were also saying that these competencies, if taught well and practiced and used while at school, that would allow the learners, when they left school and moved into university or the workplace, to actually be able to cope with the level of learning that's now required. Right across the board, it doesn't matter what occupation you go into now, things are changing at such a rate that in fact everybody is learning at an unprecedented rate across the world. So those competencies are absolutely critical. For each of the competencies, what we've done is to provide a set of underlying concepts that the learner needs to understand. Okay. The second thing we've done is, so we've got the understanding, the knowledge, understanding. The second thing was then we need to turn that knowledge into a series of techniques we can apply to develop each competency. And the third thing then is to give practice to that and allow the learner to develop the dispositions they require to demonstrate each of the competencies. So if we take an example of that, and the example we're going to take is the first of the competencies, and that is identity. Learners having a sense of their own identity is critical throughout their lives. It's one of the great pursuits of human nature, really, is to understanding self. And that can be a very, very difficult task. It's not a simple matter to understand self, coming to terms with self and who we are and how other people see us. It's a hugely challenging process. It really is. What we've developed here is a model, and like all models, they have their weaknesses and strengths, but what we're trying to do here is integrate a whole raft of terminology that we tend to use as educators without really being sure about what they mean. So let's start at the beginning. One of the things that underpins our identity is the nature of our principles and character formation. So when you're young, when you're 5, you can have a morality. You know right from wrong for everybody else, not for self. And therein lies the difficulty when we have groups of 2, 3, 4, 5, 6-year-olds in our classrooms and in schools and in preschools, is that they have a morality, but that morality means rules for others. They find it hard to apply that same morality to themselves. That develops over time, and we call applying that morality to self something called ethics. So morality is when we actually look at other people and make judgments about them, and ethics is when we actually look at our own actions and reflect on our own actions and make judgments around them. Now this is a developmental process, and earlier on in one of these sessions we talked about the growth of the number or percentage of astrocytes in the brain from when we're born to our late 20s. And we start off with predominantly neurons in our brain, and that develops over time into neurons and astrocytes. So morality over time develops into ethics, and it requires explicit teaching, explicit tasks where it get young people, young learners, to think about their own thinking. So this is a cognitive journey. So we're cognitively developing from morality into ethics, and if we keep developing that morality and ethics, we'll eventually develop a sense of spirituality. Now, I'm not talking about religion as such. I'm talking about a notion of, in fact, that we are not the centre of the universe. And in doing so, that changes your perspective on how you live your life. So we start with morality, that develops into ethics, and ethics and morality will keep developing, if encouraged, into a sense of spirituality. And this is a developmental process. It's hard to imagine when you're 5 rules for self. That's why schools have to have rules, very straight rules and very pertinent rules for young people to tell them how to behave, because they know how others should behave but not themselves. Character is that weaving together of morality, ethics and spirituality, as you can see from the diagram. Principles, on the other hand, come from a different set of capabilities. So in principles we start off with attitudes, and everybody can have an attitude. It's very easy. You can be really hacked off and really cross, or you can be really supportive of a particular team and don't like the other team. Attitudes form very early on in life. I don't like raspberries, forms very early on in life. If we keep developing and keep questioning our attitudes, and other people prompt us to do that, what happens is we slowly develop those attitudes into qualities. And you see this in reporting processes within schools. Early on it's talking about the learner's attitude to what they're doing. Later on in schooling, in the late primary years, the educators are starting to talk about the learner's qualities as human beings. Once again, this is a cognitive journey. Attitudes become qualities if we keep pushing that. Otherwise they just stay as attitudes. And we all know people who are stuck with attitudes without actually building great depth in their qualities. If we keep turning this circle, what we'll eventually find is that those attitudes and qualities start morphing into quite a complex, high-order set of values. And those values actually provide us with a framework for making good judgments on a good day. We'll always make mistakes. That's part of life. But once again, then we've got those 3 key words, please, sorry and thank you, which always come into that mix as well. So we've got our character, and then we've got attitudes, qualities and values, which actually spin together to form our principles. What happens then is you've got 2 sets, and they're not distinct, they're merged in our brains, and they actually form a set of virtues. And virtues are the outworking of our character and principles. But virtues are very interesting. There's all sorts of virtues. There's things like honesty, being determined and being diligent. They're all virtues, and they're all good things. But persistence, if we take persistence as an example, you don't want to be persistent forever. There's a time when you need to know when to give up. So persistence is a good thing to a point. And that point isn't a fixed point. It depends on the context. Honesty is another one. Honesty is a virtue. But honesty is not always the best policy. You'd end up being rude to people. When asked, how do I look in this dress? The answer is always absolutely, unbelievably gorgeous. That's always going to be the answer. Okay? If you're too honest, you'll end up insulting people. So virtues, the sum of our character and principle formation, and that will be dictated to by our experiences, the people who influence us, what we read and what we view and what we see. Many, many things will influence that. But that produces a set of virtues. Wisdom is all about applying our virtues appropriate to the context we find ourselves in. That's what wisdom essentially is. We have these virtues, and those virtues are backed up by a lot of knowledge, experience, and people we've listened to and aspire to be like, etc. But wisdom is applying virtues creatively and innovatively to the context we find ourselves in. Those virtues are also filtered through our personality. And our personality will skew our virtues, will value some more than others, will emphasize some more than others. Forgiveness may come secondary to righteousness, and so it's getting that balance right. And our personality will skew that. And we've looked, if you look in the diagram, we've sort of looked at 5 domains of personality, and these are fairly common domains that are used throughout psychology and sociology. Out of that, what falls out of that are the dispositions. Our personality dispositions are identity dispositions. Who we are and the dispositions we express on a day-to-day basis. And what we've done with each of these, as I mentioned earlier, each of these competencies is look at the body of knowledge, the underlying concepts for that, and then looking at the effective application of those through production of some strategies and techniques, and then we need to look at what the dispositions are we'd like to come out of that with as well. So things in terms of the knowledge, it's reflecting on our principles. Okay, what are they? Actually thinking about them, and also our character. Okay, it's actually realising there's a tension between actual self and my aspirational self. Who do I really want to be? There's a tension there always. Integrity, where does that come from? How do we show consistency in the application of our virtues to the context we find ourselves in? So there's always some techniques in there, some strategies in there that we need to actually develop over time. Developing a servant heart, wanting to serve others and putting self second. Some of the time, most of the time maybe, but it should be part of the time at very least. And that's a developmental process as learners move through our schools. In terms of the dispositions we want to see, we really want them to appreciate that by applying their gifts and talents, they can make a difference to their world. And that's really the big deal, is making a difference to their world. It's about developing a humility around that as well. It's about having a sense of justice. Also confronting and having the difficult conversations we need to have with others. Without those difficult conversations, things go unsaid for far too long. We need to encourage others to be who they can be. And we need to be self-aware. We need to be aware of self, a greater self-awareness. So that's the first of the 6 competencies. In the next 2 videos, we'll unpack the next 5, and you can go back and have a look at the resource online and download that and have a look at the greater commentary that goes with that and some of the links to other websites, etc. that support this work. So thank you for having listened to this, and hopefully it was of some value to you, and we look forward to seeing you somewhere around the world at some point in time. Thank you very much.